Further questions or comments? All right. Lord willing, I'll hear this again next year, so let's see what happens. Agenda item number 9, final biennial review of state listed and endangered species.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, as you recall, we started the biennial review process back in, I believe it was April of this year. We opened up the biennial review for comment. We opened the 90-day comment period from, March 15th to June 13th. We received no comments during that period. We went through and analyzed all the species listed that on either as threatened or endangered on the state threatened or endangered list. We made the determination there was no need to move species from threatened to endangered or endangered to threatened. So the recommendation before you today on the final is no changes to the listing of the species on listed as state threatened or endangered. We opened a 14-day comment period after the draft was presented at the August 23rd commission meeting. Again, we received no comments at all. We posted that through newspapers across the state and received no comments. And then we're before you today to accept the department's recommendation on no changes to the listing of state threatened or endangered species. With that, I would take any questions.
I don't have to run this through the House Bill 58 procedure.
Mr. Chairman, no, this is not a rulemaking, but it does take a motion to approve the department's recommendation.
It's old school. I can handle it. No problem. That's a good question. Without our Attorney General, Assistant Attorney General. Any questions or comments on this? Yes, sir.
Do you see any species on either list that have possibility of being removed?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Rickliff, so we will do, there is some fish species I think the Fisheries Division is working on looking at a removal. So the biennial review doesn't allow us to remove a species from the list. It just allows us to uplist it or downlist it. A removal is a whole different process where we come in front of the department, or in front of the commission to ask for, start the process. There's a long spelled out process and statute on how we delist a species. There are, like I said, fisheries I think is looking at potential on a species delisting. If we get further along with our Gould's turkey restoration in the next couple of years, I see that as a potential delisted. It's listed as threatened right now. We're close to our, as you recall, we did a recovery plan not too long ago. We're close to our goals, and that's we probably come in front of the commission hopefully in the next couple of years to start the delisting process on that. We're in the process on a peregrine falcon right now on the review of the delisting, so we're in a couple of stages right now.
That was a sizable book that you sent me. I looked at about the first 40 pages.
Any further questions or comments? Can I get a motion on this item, please?
Mr. Chairman, I move to approve the 2018 biennial review of state listed threatened or endangered species.
Second. Any further questions or comments, discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Agenda item number 10, subsequent discussion for potential rule changes on the hunting and fishing manner and method rule 19.31.10. Good morning, gentlemen. Ready when you are.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, this is the subsequent discussion over manner and method. As you all are aware, we removed manner and method from the species rules and combined them into one 3110 manner and method. So it's all in one spot. It's been about a 6 or 7 month process in reviewing that, working with some NGOs that wanted to work with it, and then various public meetings. During that process, we did amend or newly define some terms in manner and method that were pretty basic. Some of the big additions to manner and method was a license or permit, just giving additional ways to possess and clarify the possession of protected wildlife through donation certificate or what we're calling now a possession certificate. For example, of those game taken by another, it allows an individual to have that possession certificate rather than actually donating to that individual. Another change we had was sale of game animal parts, and really what we did is we just added some specifics that you can legally sell, such as rendered bear fat, teeth, or glands, castor from fur bearers. You still cannot sell meat or internal organs, which is what the rule was there to protect. Possession of game animal parts found in the field. What that's going to do is allow conservation officers the ability to seize shed antlers that are collected in violation of closures or criminal trespass or driving off-road on public land. Importation or possession of unpermitted wildlife. Currently, statute 17332 requires that any wildlife imported into the state of New Mexico must have a importation permit, which also requires that they have a health certificate. With this rule, which the Game Commission has authority, we're requiring that, again, all wildlife must have that importation permit, but it will also hold that right now what we're having the issue with is if we cannot prove that importation, we have no legal mechanism to deal with that wildlife, whether it's an alligator or a cobra. We've got to prove that importation. And what this rule is designed to do is that if they have no importation permit with that, that it could be seized. And if it's brought into the state legally and they have that importation permit, and for some reason they sell or give it to somebody else, that importation permit would be the paperwork that we would require to stay with that animal to show proof of legal importation into New Mexico to protect from those undesirable species or disease. Use of roads in hunting, looking at amending the rule, basically the shooting from the road rule. Currently, if there is no right-of-way fence, you have to be 40 feet from the edge of the road. If there is a right-of-way fence, you have to be on the other side of it. We're proposing to amend it slightly, that it would allow individuals, if there's no right-of-way fence, the individual could step off the edge of the maintained surface and legally harvest protected species. If there is a right-of-way fence, they could go to the right-of-way fence and have their firearm at least halfway across the right-of-way fence to legally harvest protected species. Use of aircraft, we're recommending changing it slightly to make it unlawful for the purposes of hunting, and that would be important, to locate a protected species with the aid of an aircraft or drone during the periods of August 1st to January 31st of each licensed year. This rule would not apply to commercial or direct flights or any other flight that was not for the purpose of hunting. And obviously with the crowd here, we'll go more in depth on that one. Driving off-road vehicles off established road. Currently, it's unlawful to drive or ride in a motor vehicle off-road. We're proposing that we would allow on private property that a private landowner could give written permission to drive off-road. You could still not harass wildlife, but if they chose to allow someone to drive across their pasture, they could do so on that private property. It would not apply if they had a unit-wide license or during the new antelope. If the public was allowed on that ranch also, they would not have that option of giving permission to certain individuals to drive off-road and not the others. But if it was strictly private and they controlled the access, they could give everyone permission to do so. Mobility impaired, really it was just a basic change, but it was important. Currently under the mobility impaired rule, it states that handicap licenses or handicap license holders can shoot from a vehicle. And the reality is that it's supposed to be mobility impaired license holders. They're certified by a doctor. They recertify that every 4 years. A handicap license is just a license that you get a reduced fee. So we just clarified that to make it consistent with the intent of the rule. Also on that one, we're recommending that the mobility impaired hunter can designate one person in writing to assist them on their hunt. Currently in the rule, they can have an individual assist them. If they clearly wound an animal, that individual that's assisting them can help reduce that animal to possession, i.e. they can finish it off, track it down and finish it off. We're just recommending that they do it in writing, and they can have, if for some reason their assistant can only be there for the weekend, they can designate a new one at any time to help finish the hunt. We're just asking to designate it in writing, so when the officers are checking them in the field, they have some document that says they are there.
Real quick, would that be the hunter having, he didn't have to go to the game and fish office, he just has it on himself?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Salazar, that is correct. It would be between the hunter and that assistant. They wouldn't have to do it.
Trying to clarify.
Mr. Chairman, Colonel, on that, so I know currently the hunter can print out his hunting license, and at the bottom half, there's a lot of space available, or on the back side of that. Could they just document it there?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, yeah, they could document it anywhere. They could do it on a napkin or on the back of the license. Just some sort of documentation that's showing that officer in the field when he checks literally an individual with a rifle that's unlicensed. It gives some documentation for us to tie it back to, and just makes that contact that much more pleasant.
To simplify it. Thank you, sir.
Proof of sex or bag limit, really all that we did now is gave the option currently for our female or antlerless type hunts. You're required to have the scalp in both ears. We're just giving the option that if they choose to, the genitalia naturally attached to one of the quarters, if they don't want to carry out a head or the scalp, and that would be sufficient. So we're just giving another option, really. One change that would occur that's not required right now is for javelina hunters. And that would be as proof of sex, because javelina, they're not required to remove the meat from the field for human consumption. We're just asking that they would be required to bring out that head and tag that head to show proof of bag limit. I think the vast majority, 99% plus, when they're hunting those javelina, they're bringing that head out anyways. Those skulls are pretty neat, and they seem to carry those out far more often than they carry out the meat. We have several that carry out the meat also, and that would just go into the simple tagging. They would tag it on the hawk. It would not be an issue. But this is to deal with those instances where nothing was brought out. Tagging, we're proposing to add electronic tagging. Licensed hunters upon harvest, they would immediately access the electronic tagging application. The app will provide, when they push that button, will provide their e-tag number, their customer identification number, and the day to kill. The hunter will then write that information on any durable material with permanent ink and attach those documents the same way they would attach the paper carcass tag, just to keep that consistent. The department issued carcass tag, the system will remain the same, other than we have made changes to the face of the license. The sticky carcass tags now they're smaller, and they're gonna have the license information on the top portion. There will be an antler tag and a carcass tag, but for those species like turkey or lion, where the bag limit is 2, that antler tag will actually be an additional carcass tag, so that will clarify a lot of that issue. Contiguous deeded property. Here, what we're proposing is that we have several ranches around the state that are contiguous and overlap into various game management units or multiple game management units. We're proposing that those individuals would be able to go to an area office at least a week before the hunt and show proof of ownership. And we would, area captain would then give them a memo stating that they could hunt the contiguous deeded property, their ranch, in multiple game management units. They would have to pick per species if they wanted to do this. If they choose to do it, it's for all. If they choose to do it for deer, it would be for all the deer hunts. They're hunting in both those GMUs. They couldn't later on hunt both GMUs and then one GMU when that specific hunt was open. And it would apply to whatever GMU the majority of their ranch fell within. Those would be the hunt dates that they would work off of.
Bobby, Mr. Chairman? The, a week before the hunt, is that every year or once and it's done, or?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Montoya, it would be every year just so we can stay on top of the ranches or private property sales. But we're anticipating that the process to be pretty simple where it won't be a big issue to do it annually like that.
Chairman, Colonel, and that's kind of where I was going with that question. But I wonder if it could even be simplified a little bit more. So I know they apply for every year ranch only or unit wide. And at that point in that same process, they can specify that they're going to go ahead and include 2 sections that are outside of that unit into that, whichever unit they're wanting to go with.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, the main thing that we're wanting is just to protect on if that property is sold or not, just so we can ensure that what they own this year or last year is still what they own this year, that we don't have any confusion, especially since it's just gonna be at an area office and we're trying to simplify it, that those officers in the field don't inadvertently start an investigation or cite somebody when they legally could have done that. It's just to give that notification.
This has to be with a acreage plat of their property, or how do you verify that you have those 2 or 3 pieces in different area, different game management units?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Montoya, yes, it will be with a plat or a deed of some sort that we can determine, even if it's not the exact acreage, if we can see on the map that obviously the majority of that property is in a specific GMU, we wouldn't need to know down to the numbers of there's 12,000 in this GMU and 8,000, which is obvious the majority, that would be the hunt dates. But we would want to see some sort of proof that way we don't have anyone.
Of the larger
Correct.
Excuse me, one other, just for clarification and simplicity also, if a rancher can't go to an actual area office, can all this be taken care of over phone, email, et cetera?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, that is correct.
Thank you.
And I believe that once they've done it once and met in person, and a lot of our officers and our captains, they know specific landowners. It will get easier and easier each year. Once they show that, hey, I didn't sell any property, or actually I gained property, there might be a longer discussion at that point. But once they know that individual and it's the same property over and over, it will be easier and easier each year.
And that's kind of where I was going with the simplicity of that annual, whenever they determine if they're gonna be ranch only, whatever, but I do understand if they just to kind of keep it there, because what I don't want to happen is the rancher for the other 2 sections from the other neighboring unit to be included, and then the second hunt, no, we're gonna hunt that, so let's kind of see if we can narrow it down for them, keep that going back and forth.
And Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, under this proposal, that would not be allowed. That's Whether they're all in or all out for that year.
Thank you.
Some miscellaneous rules that we propose to amend is the use of dogs. Currently, you have to register blood tracking dogs with the department. We're recommending that rather than register them with the department, that we would just allow up to 2 dogs for any individual as long as they kept them on a leash, and to move forward from there.
On your cameras, SD card, something you physically have to go check on a regular basis to get the information out of it is okay.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. This is only dealing with cellular or internet, something that's lifetime that would not have to be checked.
Can't
Could
sit
be-
in a meeting like this and check my satellite.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. And we did add, some clarification in that, cell camera rule. During our public process, we did have some concerns about, well, what about my cell phone? It is a cellular device, it does have a camera. So rather than have that just lingering out there, we went ahead and put it in the rule, an exception for, obviously your cell cameras, your cell phones or satellite phones that are carried on your person. So the intent of this is the trail cameras.
Great, thank you.
Use of bait, we're recommending that bait must be completely removed to include feeders for at least 10 days prior to any hunt, which is consistent with the federal rule. And that's really what most of our sportsmen, they understand, and that's the rule they have in the back of their mind when it comes to dealing with hunting over bait. So just making it consistent with that. Hunting captive big game species, really just looking at getting ahead of an issue we're starting to see with a lot of the game proof fences we've built over the last 20 years. We're coming up on that 20-year mark where they're no longer under contract. And we just want to ensure that, again, under that fair chase auspice, that we don't have individuals that are simply parking a vehicle or putting a person in front of a gate that's open, and having these deer or elk trapped and hunting them, just trying to stay in front of that. Obviously, if they close that, that would currently be illegal because it would be an unlicensed Class A park at that point. Collars and tracking devices, currently it's unlawful to put tracking devices or collars on bears and lions. We're just extending it to all species. We're starting to see that. We had a case where a Barbary sheep had a tracking collar on it. So just trying to stay ahead of that.
You live long enough to see it.
Yes, sir. Fishing had some minor changes. Really on trot lines, currently you have to put your name, address, license number. Rather than have all that personal information, we're just recommending that they can put their customer identification number on those trot lines and that'd be sufficient. Spearfishing and bow fishing, you all have seen some of the public comments on that. The proposal is to not allow spearfishing or bow fishing for species that require a length limit. Talking to various groups, that it sounds like a very enjoyable sport, very difficult sport, but we have had some tell us that there is a learning curve and it can be difficult to decipher a 13-inch walleye from a 16-inch walleye, depending on the water, definitely on the refraction if you're above it. So that was just our proposal on that.
So it is allowed, but
Currently, it is allowed.
it will continue to be allowed.
We're recommending it to not allow it if those species that have a length requirement.
But right now it's allowed, as of today, it's allowed to spearfish.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Salapack, that is correct. Except for certain waters, they did remove spearfishing from Bill Evans and I believe Lake Roberts to protect some of those trophy bass. That has been passed, I believe, but everywhere else,
Does your prowess with the bow extend to taking fish too? Or not?
It does. My question with that one is, especially, I think you're targeting walleye here, for example. What's your bag limit normally on a lake like that with the length requirements? Is it 2, is it 6?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, it's 5, but primarily what we're talking about here is gonna be bass, black bass, so largemouth, smallmouth, but also walleye. And so it's 5, however, it is also, depending on the species, either a 12 or a 14-inch length requirement. So it's not just any flat like it is for trout or something like that.
Right, and I understand that you want to allow the fish to grow to maturity, length or age, I guess, to be able to produce offspring. But the other thing is there that many spear hunters out there, spear fishermen out there that it's going to really impact our population to have a length requirement? Or could we tweak it where if you're spear fishing, you could only harvest maybe 2 or 3 or versus 5? Where we at with that?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, I don't believe that there is a lot of spear fishermen and bow fishermen out there. Probably enough to affect the resource entirely. As far as the length limit, fortunately for all of us, your secretary is a fisheries biologist. He might have a better answer.
This is the
On
Department
the
of
length
Fish.
requirement. Sorry.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I really don't feel like the spear fishermen would have an impact on the resource at all. I think we're trying to reduce the risk of creating criminals by having them shoot an undersized fish. But again, that's potentially a risk that people take, and they get to choose whether they want to accept that level of risk or not. So I think we could go either way on this particular rule.
Well, I guess I'd like to go and leave it the way it is. If we're worried about not potentially making them illegal, now we're gonna make them all illegal because we have a rule that says you can't spearfish. And there's, whether it's 10 people or 100 or whatever in the state, as long as, I guess we're gonna leave Lake Roberts out and Bill Evans, which is fine. I would personally like to leave spearfishing the way it is. The rule, no length change, no size difference, just leave it the way it is today, just so that the ones that want to spearfish can still spearfish across the state. Because I believe now elephant bead is a catfish considered a game fish.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner
So
Salvatore.
I know there's a few people, I've had some friends of the state police that have done it in years past. If we're gonna limit that, well, that's gonna create just a big turmoil. I'd like to leave it the way it is, personally, the way it is right now.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Salvatore, I would note that only walleye and bass have length limits.
No, I don't worry about the length. I'm just saying if we don't, I would rather not limit spearfishing at all, because we're just gonna create havoc for the people that have been doing it.
Mr. Chairman, Colonel, I just want to simplify it. I think, they put the time, the effort. We want people out in the lake. If it's a new sport, to encourage people to go out and look at our natural resource. I think we have plenty of biologists. I know this gentleman back here, you definitely monitor that and we'll see what the data tells us. And if we feel that, how about a survey for these spear fishermen to see what they've harvested? I don't know. We got to come up with a better way to kind of monitor that. And if it does scientifically impact our populations, then I think we should act on it. But I would kind of like to see it just not have a length restriction and kind of simplify things and see where it grows.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, that's, I guess, just for clarification on my part as we move forward. And that was kind of 2 different things. Do we want to allow spearfishing and bow fishing as currently is, or do we want to remove the length requirement, or it would not have an effect at that point?
I would say remove the length requirement, and I think that would kind of support those fishermen. No different than some of our muzzleloader units that are allowing traditional equipment, you know. I think it's kind of the same type of, let the data tell us where we're going.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, that's where I would have to rely on our fisheries biologist on the importance of that length requirement, on what that's doing to the total fishery. We could, as Commissioner Salopek brought forward, we can keep the size restriction or the size limit and just allow and accept that collateral damage if they do make a mistake under the water. Obviously, if they shoot an undersized fish and release it, although it will swim off for the next 2 minutes, it is dead. We're not going to find those. So that's, I just need to make sure we.
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple. Chairman and Commissioner Ramos, so just one other point of clarification. If we were gonna change either bag limit for them or a length limit, reduce it or eliminate anything, that would require a change in the fisheries rule. So currently that does not live in this rule.
Okay. I just think we need to simplify it somehow and not,
Well, in my opinion, simple is keeping it where it is right now. Let them spearfish in the lakes that aren't closed and let's go. It's pretty simple.
Seems like a reasonable compromise. So do you want that included in the final version of the rule?
I would like to see it the way it is right now. Let them spearfish. Like, these are dedicated people. I mean, they're gonna do their best to make sure they are within the law. And we're gonna take it away. I don't think it's right.
Mr. Chairman, we just need to have a pretty good foundation as we gotta present this, give this to the register on the 18th.
Sure.
That'll be pretty solid.
I think you keep it the way that it is. I mean, that seems to be the sense of the commission right now. Everyone were spearfishing and bow fishing, and it were a major problem. I think we treated it differently. Let's back it up.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, I guess it's not on here, but another one that far and away has got the most public comment over the last week is, we proposed eliminating, the 2 fly limit in the San Juan. We probably have at this point, probably about 30 public comments that we received via the internet or our website against taking that restriction away. So that is another one that we would need clarification on. Want to keep that it's a 2 fly limit on the San Juan versus allowing people to make that choice, and if they choose to use 3.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Is that a problem that we run into very often? In other words, are we 2 flies, 3 flies, does it make us any difference? It's another one of those things.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Montoya, I don't think it makes us any difference. We've had very few violations of individuals using more than 2 flies in several years. Again, we were just under, when we started this, trying to simplify as much as we could, but we have gotten some pretty significant pushback in the last week. I don't know if word finally got to them or how it occurred, but in the last week, those people on a 2 fly limit, they feel that it's going to have an impact on the resource.
Director Sloan, what do you think? As the director of the Department of Fish.
And other stuff. Mr. Chairman, this particular issue has some history to it. I don't know, 5 or 6 years ago, that limitation, probably longer than that, maybe 10, was placed into rule because we were beginning to see a large number of outfitters using the technique for individuals that were not particularly skilled at fly fishing, and they would drift it along. And there was a significant concern raised by a large group in San Juan about foul hooking. We put that in there. The technique I don't think is as popular as it has been in the past. It was at the time. So it was largely in there to prevent foul hooking and due to the concern of anglers. So it's potentially as much a social issue as it is a resource issue. I guess that if a large number, that number increased well above what it was when we put the rule in place, it potentially could have an impact. But it would take a pretty large number of folks to have an impact.
Is it catch and release on all of the San Juan?
On the special trout waters, yes.
Right, so it's all catch and release. So if you have 2 flies, 3 flies, you're still gonna have to release that fish, is that correct?
That is correct. The concern is with the foul hooking and the wrapping in the 3 to 5 feet worth of extra line with hooks on it.
So your proposal is to keep it the same or change it?
Mr. Chairman, our proposal was to eliminate the mandate that you can only use 2 flies. And really, again, where this came forward is our mindset early on was to simplify and also looking similar to our weapon restriction where we're proposing getting rid of, as you all know, for elk, barb sheep, or elk, oryx, bighorn sheep, the restriction is 24 caliber or larger at this point. We're recommending also with that to eliminate, because our sportsmen typically self-regulate, they choose the proper weapon type to go out there with. We're looking at it through the eyes of, should it be illegal? Again, it would be extreme to take someone to jail for using 3 flies, but it could happen. Should it be illegal? And that's where we were going. And I understand there's some social issues with this, and we've got to balance those. But that was the eye that we went at this with, was trying to simplify as much as we could.
So 3 flies would not be illegal under the proposal?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. If you were caught with 3 flies, you would be cited.
One more. So, Bobby, does this apply just to the San Juan or is it any special trout waters?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Salatech, this currently applies only to the San Juan.
I'd like to change personally. I don't have no problem with 3 flies, good, whatever.
Change to allow.
Change the route, go back to 3. I mean, yes, change. I like the way you all have it now, going forward. For change.
Any, we'll keep going through this, but any further questions or comments on this one? I think the change is okay. I think we've shown, at least with this commission, none of this is written in stone. If we run into a problem, we'll address it. And so, I think what you proposed is a fair and reasonable compromise, maybe not on a difficult issue, but it makes sense to me.
One more quick question. If a fly fisher, woman or man were to get a ticket, would it stand up in court?
Chairman, Commissioner Salatech, that is right now, it's one of the listed penalty assessments. We have, as far as best I can tell, only 3 citations have ever been written for this violation. All look like they were part of, part of the same occurrence. This does not appear to be an issue that is rampant.
And thank you for that. That's where I was trying to lead it.
And what was the outcome?
I believe, if I recall correctly, they were all penalty assessment. They accepted the penalty assessment. In other words, they just paid fine like a speeding ticket.
All right, let's move on. What else you got?
We simplified the language in bait fish and then simplified the language in use of boats and motors across the state. Same thing with penalty assessments, we just clarified the language and we made it consistent. With our public meetings, we had 4 public meetings. The first one was in Las Cruces, then Albuquerque, Las Cruces, then Roswell, Albuquerque, and then Raton. Marginal participation in Albuquerque. The pilots outnumbered everyone 10-1 at that one, and had some pretty good discussion. This is just a breakdown. This is as of Wednesday evening, so we have had a pretty good influx of some more public comments since then. With the aircraft rule, we had 13 against, that's probably closer to 18 against now and 4 in favor. Electronic tagging, we had 6 against electronic tagging, 8 against the draw lock rule, and that draw lock rule is that we are proposing to not allow draw locks on archery hunts, which that's a mechanism that locks your bow at full draw. We're considering it a crossbow. Those 8 draw lock comments appear to be all the same family. They have an individual in the family that is an amputee that uses one, and they're concerned about that. But we do have ways to address that through the director's accommodation, or simply if that individual has a mobility impaired card, he can continue to use that. So I think we've got that addressed. We had 2 public comments against shooting from the road that were saying we did have various verbal comments at the meetings that were a little bit concerned with it. Some felt it was confusing. We did have 5 or 6 comments at a few of the meetings that felt that we put a lot of significant effort into combating road hunting, and they felt that this was
Step backwards.
a step backwards towards that road hunting. The similar comment was on that everyone liked the fact that when there's not a right-of-way fence, that you could just step off the maintained edge of the road and legally harvest protected species. Where they got the hang-up was when there is a right-of-way fence, they thought it was simpler to just get over the right-of-way fence versus resting a rifle on it or not. They felt that was somewhat promoting road hunting and would be a black eye on hunting, was the comment we got.
Just need to bring a pair of Smiths with you.
Right. So that is one that I would, because it came up consistently, that I think we need to discuss, do we want to go forward as is or adjust that one? The broadhead rule, we just had the one. We did have a handful against the weapon caliber restriction, again saying, it's 22 is nonsense to allow 22s to hunt for elk. And we agree, but we just, in my 21-year career, I've never seen anyone go under beyond it. I don't think we ought to. I think it's an unnecessary regulation. The cell camera rule is probably 1 against and probably 3 in favor of it now. We did have the concerns, like I said, on the cell phones, but we addressed that. The javelina head tagging, the 1 against, was more so of, well, we should be required to take out the meat, and we'll have to address that statutorily. The San Juan, the flies, again, obviously there was significant comment against it. And then the tracking dog use, we had 1 in favor, and then various comments that did not pertain to the rule. Elk comments, we should allow spotlighting, various things like that that just did not pertain.
I got one question. I asked Mr. Payne earlier. It looks like there's an updated definition of license to permit. Can either one of you or one of the 3 of you tell me what that's looking like? Because I wanted to account for Brave New World electronic tags and then paper as well.
Mr. Chairman, would you like me to just to read this?
Yeah, that would be helpful.
Okay. So we're proposing right now to place this in section 10 of this rule underneath the header of permits and licenses issued. And it's currently, the way that we have it written, it says proof of license. Each licensee or permittee must have a copy of their hunting, fishing, or trapping license or their department-issued collection permit in their possession while hunting, fishing, trapping, or collecting protected species in New Mexico. Licenses or permits may be in electronic or paper format. The authorization number for fishing or game hunting is also valid pursuant to section 17-3-5C in MSA 1978. The license, authorization, or permit must be produced upon request by any law enforcement officer authorized to enforce chapter 17.
Okay, I think that. Do you feel like you got most of what you wanted in this updated rule, not the one that you just read, but across the board for law enforcement?
Mr. Chairman, I do.
Nothing's ever perfect, but
Nothing's ever perfect, but we clarified a lot of minor things that are gonna make a significant difference. I think we're in a good spot.
I appreciate your flexibility on this. A lot of work went into it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I want to thank you, Bob, and Ty, for the meetings we've had and communication. You can't keep everybody happy and everything that is the real world. I have one question on Javelina. Has it always been where you didn't have to bring it out of the fields, or did that change recently?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Salovey, it's been like that my entire career statutorily.
But it says edible portions.
No.
There's a good question there.
Well, it's one of the species that's not listed as required.
It's with bear and cougar.
Bear, lions, javelina, squirrels, fall out of portions. We have a lot of people bring it out anyways. I personally, when I hunt javelina, I bring it out. I typically donate it as quick as I can to somebody.
You answered my question. But no, we always have it. I'm shocked that it's not part of the deer and elk and everything else that you have to bring it up. It's
Most sportsmen.
It's amazing what you learn.
Most sportsmen.
You're around long enough.
Chairman Colonel, is there anything that the department can do down the road, to set it up to change its statute? Change the statute on that?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, yeah, that would be something that the department would have to go to the governor's office and propose to see if they wanted to move forward with that, find that sponsor. I think it would likely never been, we're combating so many issues each legislative session that one has just not been high on the priority list.
Same thing with squirrels. I wasn't aware that squirrels were on that list as well. So there's 4 species: cougar, bear, squirrels, and javelina.
Look, the squirrel.
So you don't have to bring schools up?
I didn't know that.
With Tessa here, you don't have to.
All right, let's take some public comment.
Yeah.
Joel Gay, where's Joel?
Wow, I didn't even see you back there.
Snuck in.
Walked in late.
It's nice to see you again.
This, right here?
That looks like it.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director Sloan, congratulations.
Thank you.
I'm Joel Gay, representing backcountry hunters and anglers. And while we support most of the changes proposed by the department, there was a couple that we did want to specifically address. The first one is the 22 caliber. We just don't think that size of bullet has the power or mass to quickly and ethically kill a large, thick-skinned animal like an elk or oryx. We see no need to change the current rules, which allow 22 caliber bullets centerfire for certain small game only. Smaller game, not small game. On the shooting from the road, we do not support the proposed change. The proposal would allow a hunter on a dirt two-track road, which is basically where most of us hunt, with no right-of-way fence, to basically step out of their vehicle and fire. The existing regulation requires the shooter to move 40 feet from the edge of the road, which does not seem like an unreasonable requirement for both safety and ethical reasons. On the banning of the use of aircraft, we support the proposed changes from August 1st to January 31st. BHA believes this regulation will help to ensure ethical and fair chase hunting in New Mexico by decreasing the likelihood that aircraft and drones will be used to spot, pursue, and to harass and hunt big game animals unlawfully. We also agree with the department that this section should not apply to the operation of aircraft in the usual manner where there was no attempt or intent to locate game. On the cellular cell camera issue, we strongly support the concept of fair chase and ethical hunting and support the general idea of prohibiting the real-time remote location of animals. But as written, this change is overly broad and insufficient to meet the rapidly changing technologies that might be applied in the fairly near future. So we would prefer a more generic rule that prohibits the action rather than focus on the technology of real-time remote location of animals. And last, sorry, this is too long. On the tagging of harvested game, the current the regulation is drafted says the proper location for a carcass tag is attached to the hock tendon. If you debone an animal, that's problematic. So we would just suggest adding to that, the current language, the proper location is either a hock tendon on the hind legs, or if the animal is deboned in the field, to the largest portion of meat.
You wanna do that? Do we count for that?
Mr. Chairman, we could do that. We just felt, we thought about boned out meat also, and a lot of times I bone out my own meat. But if you can leave that hock tendon attached to that quarter of meat, that chunk, it was just, again, to keep it consistent across the board. We don't want to add additional issues,
Yeah,
but that was our thought, but either way.
So Bobby, on that, because I've been facing that as well, I bone all my meat out. Where does that go? You have multiple bags, you have one carcass, we've just been leaving it on the license and carrying it in possession. Where does it go?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioner Ramos, by the rule, you're supposed to attach it to that carcass or that boned out meat. Again, just trying to be as consistent as possible by leaving it on that hock tendon. At least we know, even when it's boned out, we know that quarter, you can tell which game bag typically that quarter is going to be in. It was a consistency issue, you know, whether for boned out meat, we have it on the hock tendon or with the largest amount.
We'll think about it.
Yeah.
It's not, what you're suggesting is not unreasonable.
Just
Now, maybe some of the other things are, but I will agree, I will agree, but you can see we agree on a lot, we don't disagree on everything, so that's good.
Thank you.
We'll visit on that and see if we need to go on that.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, the important thing is that just that carcass tag isn't floating around somewhere.
It's gotta be on a piece of
It's gotta be on something.
Something that's consistent.
Okay, thank you, Joel. Mr. Crenshaw. How are you, sir? Didn't I just see you and Sean? Didn't we share a table together?
Yes, we did.
And I got the raw end of that deal.
Yes, you did, sir.
I think I did all right, though.
Yeah, the legislators that interim committee had the chairman cornered. I had a pretty easy ride there.
Yeah, that's fun.
My name is John Crenshaw, I'm president of New Mexico Wildlife Federation. Thank you for the opportunity here. Generally, the Federation supports the idea of consolidating these rules into one and have made a lot of improvements. I'll confess to maybe my age and naivete. It's a sad day when you have to have a rule against putting a radio tracking collar on big game so somebody can go shoot it later.
I would agree.
And I would hope when we get to the revocation section, that becomes a 20-pointer, if it's not already, and I don't think it's in there. specifically that I know of. And that if an outfitter is engaged in that and caught and convicted, that his license is jerked to a minimum. That said, we'll examine some of these things more closely and be in contact and be aggregate you folks with any changes. But some of the thought made tonight that the thing from shooting from the edge of the road, we share the EHA's concerns. Chairman or Commissioner Montoya could maybe help me in this, but I tend to think that that was done quite a number of years ago as a fair chase of the 40-foot rule to, again, keep that distance. It's a shield. And just stand right beside it and kind of disappear into it. And again, the .22 caliber, I understand what the Colonel was saying. Most people are overgunned as opposed to undergunned if there is go either way. But as we've just seen, with the rule on the radio collaring and radio tracking, there are darn tools out there. And it's not hurt to have that in there. We think it should stay, and if there haven't been any violations, that's wonderful. And maybe if there weren't any violations or people talk 22s hunting at an elk, just because that rule is in there. And on the camera use, I believe you all are working on that. We did have some concerns. We do support the aircraft rule. And with that, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Crenshaw. Terry Romero.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners, Director Sloan. Carrie Romero with the New Mexico Council of Outfitters and Guides. Thank you for allowing me to be fashionably late once again. The outfitting industry does agree with the majority of the proposed changes to this rule. I just have a couple of points to make. As the proposal relates to shooting from the road, the outfitting industry does not have an official position. However, it does seem unnecessary to give hunters the ability to shoot directly from a paved highway, especially in the absence of a right-of-way fence. It also seems like it could create confusion as to which paved highways are included. For example, a 2-lane paved highway that has a third passing lane every couple of miles. So overall, this change seems unnecessarily lenient. On to my other point, I'm sure it will come as no surprise to any of you that I am personally opposed to the proposed changes as they relate to the aircraft rule. The outfitting industry, however, does not have an official position on the issue. In fact, the overwhelming majority of outfitters will be completely unaffected by this rule change. They don't care whether the rule is 48 hours or 12 months. It has absolutely no impact on their business, which should tell you something. An industry that is supposedly solely responsible for all of the air traffic during hunting season has no opinion on a major rule change. This is a solution in search of a problem. The only thing that will be accomplished with the rule change is to encourage hunters who know nothing about aviation to falsely report the tail number of any single-engine aircraft flying low and slow over the forest. I personally think this change will be an enforcement nightmare, and the unintended consequences which will be felt by the aviation industry should not be ignored by the Commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave Jesselrum? Jessurun. I'm sure I got that.
That's it. Oh, yes, sir. Good morning, Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Dave Jessurun, the founder and CEO of High Country Air Service. And as I'm sure you can conclude from the name of my business, I have a keen interest in the aircraft rule. As someone who's founding a business to move hunters, anglers, and trappers around the state, I'm keenly interested in the proper implementation of such a rule. As I'm sure you also all agree, we all support a fair chase doctrine, and no one is in favor of using airplanes to unfairly hunt game in the state. But I am concerned that the way that the rule is currently written may be vague and unnecessarily restrict lawful aviation activities, as Ms. Romero just alluded to. And so for those reasons, I would encourage you to refer to the New Mexico Pilots Association's alternative language that I think that they have submitted in some previous comments, and consider that as a possible alternative to what has already been written. Specifically, in paragraph E, the New Mexico Pilots Association language has an excellent reference to the 48-hour rule, which I think works very well. And additionally, in subparagraph number 2, I would delete the word airline and add the word or chartered, so that the exception does not specifically only limit itself to large airlines, but would also allow an exception for chartered operations to move people and on their direct flights from one part of the state to the other, so that those hunters could then, or anglers could go capture their game. Thank you very much for your time.
Mr. Murrow. I brought my teleprompter. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. I'm Raul Murrow, a retired person and Director Emeritus of the Recreational Aviation Association. I also work for the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association as a regional representative, and I still volunteer for it. AOPA is the world's largest such organization. I won't repeat their written comments which you've received, but I will discuss some related matters. First, the proposed rule regarding aircraft is so overreaching in scope and so deleterious to the interested pilots, not only in New Mexico, but to all pilots who may wish to fly here, that it has roused the concern of its members. It is so broad and subject to misinterpretation and misapplication that it presents a clear threat to pilots and their passengers to have unimpeded access to the state's navigable airspace, thus discouraging their use of it. This violates the intent of Congress in assigning aviation regulations solely to the Federal Aviation Administration. We are also concerned about the negative economic impacts of the proposed rule. It appears to make illegal any aerial scouting over most of the state for half of each year, and will also likely discourage many pilots from flying in New Mexico. We have a joint campaign with the U.S. Forest Service, BLM, tourism, economic development, and many other agencies and groups to promote the state as a destination. Yet the rule would likely undermine that effort. Yet we see no evidence that an economic impact statement has been prepared or such impacts even considered. Discouragement of aviation also appears to violate the purposes for which funds were granted to your agency under the Pittman-Robertson Act, which states in part that the funding is to be used to provide recreational access, not to hinder such access. Discouragement of aviation, Note that recently Secretary of the Interior Ryan Zinke sent a directive to all of his department's agencies that access to public lands for recreational purposes is one of his top priorities. We do know you have enforcement problems which must be addressed. Instead of proposing unenforceable and harmful rules, we ask you again to work with us to develop rules that work in both of our interests. Please implement the replacement language that we have proposed. Thank you, and I'll be happy to take any questions. Any questions in the forum? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Clayton Stanzik.
Morning, gentlemen. I'm going to pick up where Mr. Murrow left off with the economic impact. Most of the guys who fly are not the guys who use the out-of-state version coming by governor's tags. Governor's tags were $1 million input to the Game and Fish Department this year. Roughly, right? Those guys are not going to come here if they can't fly. They're going to go to Colorado, get a flight 24 hours. The old rule is good. Works fine. We don't have any convictions on record. Is that because we can't enforce it? Or is that because most everybody is a good actor? There are a couple of bad actors. We all know who they are. I know who they are. You guys can know them. And I would propose that there's more, what do we call it, impact on the resource from poachers between Tierra El Maria and the Colorado border than legally or illegally taken animals observed from the air. If you make a new rule, those bad actors, they're not gonna pay any attention to the new rule. You just need better that they pay attention to an old rule. So why spend the time? Why fix something that isn't broken? A couple of things. If you want to change the rule, the Pilots Association wording is well written, and it allows an industry to continue. I know the outfitters don't weigh in on this rule as a group, mostly because while there are 6 or 8 governor tags, those are the guys that fly. And so there's 6 or 8 outfitters who get those guys, and that's why the majority of outfitters don't care. I guess that's really about it. I would question numbers that there are only 13 comments against the rule, because gosh, there's more people than that just came out to the meeting. It's pretty easy to sit down and type out a comment. There's my 2 minutes. Thank you.
I believe that's written comments.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct, and that's written comments as of Wednesday evening. So we received.
There may very well have been more people.
Like I say, I just, that just doesn't seem right to me, because we had more than that many people at the local meeting. Everybody said, I'm gonna go home and type out a comment.
That doesn't always happen. Ron Roscoe.
Thank you very much, Chairman, Commissioners. I also want to thank the Game and Fish folks, Griego, and all of those that are out there in the field trying to enforce our regulations. I consider myself a law-abiding pilot and a hunter, and I've flown under this 48-hour rule for decades here in New Mexico. I've never harassed animals. I've used aircraft to fly 48 hours before a hunt. We look for water. We look for where there's been rain. We look for fire burns. We look at camping areas. That's what we're doing. If you spot an elk, for example, from the air, I guess you'd consider yourself lucky. That's not the purpose of the flights that I do. I go in there to look and get a lay of the land. Hunting in a new area where there's roads, where there's not roads. That's what I use the 48-hour rule for. I don't know of a single conviction under the current rule. And I appreciate the enforcement nightmare it must be. Some guy flies in, you get a call, says, hey, somebody was flying in here, looked like they were hurting out. What do you do? It's very difficult, and I appreciate that. But to take that current regulation, which says, okay, in 48 hours, we're going to enforce it, and extend it to 6 months without addressing how we're going to enforce it under the 48-hour rule, just doesn't make sense. If we can't enforce it in 48 hours, how on earth are we ever going to do it for 6 months? So from other speakers and in the letter that I submitted, we made some direct suggestions on how we'd like to work more closely with Fish and Game. As pilots, we have an idea of maybe who might be doing it, or there's various things that we'll be suggesting and are in our letters on how we can work directly with Fish and Game to try to catch these guys. It's a bad name for pilots, and it's a bad name for hunters, and we want to eliminate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Stephen Fleming.
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, good morning. I'm a pilot, and I have some concerns. While I'm a member of the organization, as previously mentioned, I'm here to represent an individual before. In any endeavor, there are always bad actors, and they require reasonable and lawful efforts to minimize those impacts. I understand the enforcement officers have a difficult job in apprehending and prosecuting these violators who harvest game illegally. However, the proposed changes to the manner and method rule do not not only do not achieve the intended purpose, but attempt the authority of the commission and the department. And this attempt gravely and unlawfully upend the justice principle of innocent until proven guilty. My concerns are these. The language of the proposed rule is excessive in scope and application. The rule attempts to regulate matters not under the commission or departmental authority. Arbitrary and capricious enforcement is made more, not less likely. And requirements for probable cause in these violations or presumed violations are ignored. I request that action on this portion of the proposed rule be tabled until further review and consideration be accomplished. I've submitted a letter, and I believe you have it in your packets as well. And I appreciate the opportunity to comment today. Thank you.
Thank you. Ron Keller?
Well, Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director Sloan, my name is Ron Keller. I am a pilot and a hunter in New Mexico. With respect to the proposed rule change regarding use of aircraft, I would like to point out that several partnerships have been forged between aviation groups and federal, state, and private entities. First of all, the Recreational Aviation Foundation, a 9,000-member group, entered into a memorandum of understanding with both the U.S. Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management several years ago to foster a cooperative relationship to preserve, maintain, and create airstrips for recreational access. This was done at the national level and has the full support of the state. Additionally, the New Mexico Airstrip Network, of which I am a founding member, was formed to foster cooperative relationships at a state level. U.S. Forest Service, BLM, New Mexico Aviation Division, Recreational Aviation Foundation, New Mexico Pilots Association, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, New Mexico Economic Development, New Mexico Tourism Department, and several others were all signatories on the MOU. Lastly, a partnership exists between Recreational Aviation Foundation and New Mexico Pilots Association to maintain the ability to access recreational areas of New Mexico by utilizing backcountry and recreational airstrips. It is my view that changing the use of aircraft rule to lengthen the time frame from the current 48-hour rule will have a detrimental effect on all of the progress made to date with the aforementioned partnerships. Therefore, I am adamantly opposed to such a rule change. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Joyce Woods?
Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, Director Sloan. I'm Joyce Woods, the president of the New Mexico Pilots Association. We represent 4,300 pilots statewide. I'm an active pilot, and although not a hunter, I grew up always looking for wildlife, and I still do daily in my flights in the air or driving around on the ground. So locating game is something that I do, although not for hunting. NMPA opposes a broad 6-month restriction on aircraft use. And the way it's written reflects the excessive overreach that's already been mentioned, offering no better way to enforce it. It makes pilots responsible for compliance rather than hunters. We comply with the FAA regulations. Somebody like me may be aware of a 48-hour rule, but I don't go look at hunting regulations. We've received a lot of letters from our members and partner organizations, both locally and nationwide. And they all look to us for providing solutions. And we're definitely interested and happy to hear about the flexibility, because we do, as you noted, there were at least 4 support of the rule. And I know that for the people that I've talked to, they don't really realize some of the subtleties of the rule. And then once you talk to them about it, they realize. I think it comes down to an and or an or. And so I want to talk about what we're recommending to make sure you understand this. We found that the language in the Idaho rule, and you should have my letter, And the second page is the Idaho rule, and it's marked where the aircraft language is. We found that to be simple, which I know in this whole manner and method rule change, you're trying to make this simpler. But it separates the spotting and finding game and relaying it to the ground from casual flying overhead. And we think that that is the positive way to do so. Idaho does it as same day. We kept the 48 understandable by most pilots. So the proposed language, we think, incriminates law-abiding pilots. We think that either you should leave the language alone and do with 48 hours that you currently have. The Idaho language is acceptable to us. Another alternative would be just to keep the current language and delay, and let's work together on a win-win solution for this that isn't incriminating. And I don't know if the and or makes sense, but we looked at the proposal, and if you change the or to and.
Which or and are
Yeah,
you referring to?
so in E, number 1, the way it's proposed, and I didn't give you the current language, so maybe I need to read that. What it says is it is unlawful for any individual for the purpose of hunting to locate or assist in locating a protected species from or with the aid of aircraft or drone, and the next or to relay the location. So if it was to fly and relay, then it's very close to the Idaho language. And the 6 months doesn't matter, it's that you don't do it, period. And I think that's what, when I'm talking about the oppositions, most people who do, the people who are supporting this rule as written believe that it is, that you can't spot and tell someone on the ground, right now, that go here. And so that's what I think that and, or that or is what makes it so wide reaching. Does that make sense?
I understand what you're saying.
And the Idaho language is just even more clear and simpler, and it actually addresses the helicopter issue that some of our members, and I think some of your previous discussions have talked about herding with helicopters, and that's not necessarily addressed in the language.
Thank you. Any questions, Ms. Gibbs? Okay. Thank you. We have your written comments as well.
All right.
Thank you. Any further questions or comments on any part of this rule? It's not quite speak now or forever hold your peace, but when do we need to publish this by?
Mr. Chairman, it needs to be submitted to archives on the 18th of this month.
Okay. So if there's any tinkering to be done, will that, we suggested a few things today. Will that go back up on the website, the final version?
Mr. Chairman, that is correct.
Okay. So will you get a final version, Director Sloan? Will you email it to all of us?
I certainly will.
Yes. Okay, no further questions or comments on this one. Let's take a quick break and then we'll pick up on number